Hey, this is Katrina Bird, or my patients call me Dr. Bird. Welcome back to my channel. So I am so excited to talk about the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine today. It recently received emergency use authorization by the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, in the United States. So let's talk about it. All right, so today we're talking about the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. So let's get started. So this is a world map. The red dots indicate the prevalence of COVID in different areas of the world. So let's put some numbers behind this. So as of March 1st, there are over 113 million COVID-19 cases worldwide, with about 2.5 million deaths globally. In the United States, we have over 28 million cases, which is kind of crazy because the United States continues to lead the world with the highest number of COVID cases, despite only making up about 4% of the world's population. So, since we're talking about vaccines, let's talk about primary prevention, which means to intervene before an adverse health effect occurs through a measure such as vaccinations. And so that's basically what we want to do today. So let's talk about how vaccines work. So first, you actually manufacture a vaccine and you give it to the person. And once the vaccine is in the body, it prompts the body to make an antibody response against whatever you want to vaccinate someone against. So in this case, we're talking about SARS-CoV-2. And just to remind you, SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus that causes COVID-19. So SARS-CoV-2 stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. And COVID-19 stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. So just to be clear on the definitions. So back to how vaccines work. So you give the vaccine, it produces an antibody response against our targeted disease, in this case, which our targeted infection, in this case, which it is SARS-CoV-2. So then if you were to encounter this virus again, it'll either totally block or control infection. And that's all we're trying to do. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have treatment or vaccines against this virus. So in order to create a vaccine, we had to start from the beginning. So after the preclinical work was done, each vaccine candidate went through a process called clinical trials. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So phase 1 usually enrolls a small number of healthy volunteers with the goal of determining how frequent to give the drug or medication or vaccine, and to determine if there are any serious adverse effects. Next, phase 2 is usually a process where you enroll a larger number of people. If we're actually given a medication for a disease, for example, like hypertension, you would enroll people with hypertension in the second and third phase, but that's not the case for the COVID-19. So in phase 3, you enroll an even larger number of people. And again, this is done to determine how safe the drug is and if it's effective. And then once you finish all 3 of these phases, you go through phase 4, which is usually after you receive FDA approval, or in the United States, it's Food and Drug Administration. So you go through phase 1 through 3, you submit your findings to the FDA gives you approval, and then you go into phase 4. So phase 4 is when your medication or vaccine is widely available, and you get to gather even more information about how safe the drug is, if it's effective, and if you're having any issues. All right, so let's dig deeper into the actual Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. So let's just break this down. So AD stands for adenovirus. 26 is the particular type of adenovirus. So adenovirus 26. And then CoV, so coronavirus 2. And SM stands for spike protein. So let's go deeper. So an adenovirus is a double-stranded DNA virus. And what's unique about this vaccine that's different from the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine is that it uses a mutated adenovirus to carry genetic material that encodes for the spike protein. So let's break that down. So specifically, this adenovirus is mutated so that it's unable to replicate on its own. So that's something that you want, because if you're going to use this for a vaccine, you don't want to give it to someone and then it just starts going haywire and actually causing infection. So that's number one. And two, remember, we want to create a vaccine to something, a protein or a substance that's very specific to coronavirus, to the SARS-CoV-2. Because remember, there are a lot of different coronaviruses out there. So we don't want to create a vaccine against every single one of them. We want to create a vaccine against the one that's causing this pandemic. So that is why we call it a vector. This adenovirus will carry the genetic material for the spike protein specifically. All right, so let's go through the few steps. So this picture is actually from the New York Times, which actually really breaks down simple steps of how this vaccine works. All right, so we have our vaccine here. And so we have our vaccine. It's injected into the arm of our patient. So what happens kind of on a microscopic level is this adenovirus goes into the cell. It's not just any cell. We're not going to go into the details, but it's very specific cells it goes into. So the adenovirus goes into the cell. It travels to the nucleus, which is like the kind of brain of the cell, and it pushes out its DNA, because remember I told you adenovirus is a DNA virus. It pushes its DNA into the nucleus. There in the nucleus, there are different proteins and machinery that's really good at reading genetic material. And what it'll do is it'll start producing the mRNA, because remember, coronavirus is a RNA virus, but I already told you adenovirus is a DNA virus. So what it does, it translates this genetic material from DNA to the mRNA. Okay, and once that's done, the mRNA leaves the nucleus. The next thing is proteins that are outside of the nucleus will read the mRNA and produce spike protein. And once this happens, the spike protein travels to the outer surface of the cell and kind of looks like this. And this is perfect because now antibodies recognize them, like, oh, okay, well, normally the cells aren't supposed to have spike protein. This must be something new. So let me actually produce antibodies against it. And this is specifically neutralizing antibodies. This is important because this is how the body is creating an immune response against the spike protein, which is very specific to the SARS-CoV-2. All right, so let's go deeper. So the Assemble study is the name of the phase 3 clinical trial for the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. They haven't officially published their work yet, but I got a lot of this information from the information that they submitted to the FDA for approval. So, and the clinicaltrials.gov website. So let's talk a little bit about it. All right, so the study design was very, very, very similar to the Pfizer and Moderna. So they enrolled over 40,000 people who were 18 and older. So again, this is a trial that did not include children. So participants were either given the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine or they were given a placebo. So this study was double blind. So the people actually administering the vaccine as well as the study participants did not know which one they were getting, whether it was the vaccine or the placebo. Few more highlights. So, and this is a little bit different than the Moderna and the Pfizer. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they first did phase 1 and 2 simultaneously. After they yielded pretty good results from this, they decided to do separate phase 3 study. Again, this was a randomized placebo-controlled study. And the one cool thing about this vaccine is it only requires just one dose for full vaccination. All right, let's just talk briefly, very, very briefly about the racial and ethnic disparities in COVID-19 infection in the United States. So here, a couple things. So in general, white or Caucasian have the highest rates of COVID-19 at 55.9%, and followed by Hispanics at 20.7%. However, Hispanics only make up 18.5% of the population, but they're like the second leading, leading group that has COVID-19. And for Black and African American, make up about 13%. And of the most recent data, COVID-19 is only seen about 12.2%. And this is just the most recent data. Earlier in the pandemic, it definitely was skewed towards more Black people having disproportionate amount of Black people having COVID-19. We're still seeing disparities in our Hispanic population. So there's a lot of work to be done. We won't go into the details of why these disparities exist because that is a whole video on its own. However, this leads me to kind of talk about the demographics of the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen COVID-19 study. All right, so this is busy. Like I said, I got this from the data that was submitted to the FDA. So let's break it down. So this goes through the subgroups. This is the number of people, and this kind of column talks about the people who actually received the study vaccine. This column speaks on the people who received the placebo, and this column speaks on our participants. So let's just focus on our participants. So in general, the majority of people, they were between the age 18 and 59. At this point, we know people who are kind of over 50 have like higher morbidity, so unsure what this actual breakdown, because this is a pretty wide age group. So next, I would say it's relatively even with a skew more male than female, but almost the same. When we talk about race, so let's break it down. For American Indian or Alaska Native, 8.3%. For Black or African American, it was 17.2%. For white, it was 62.2%. We do go through Hispanic on the next slide. So for his people who identify for Hispanic, it was 45.1%. So yeah. And then this study was performed in multiple countries. This statistic is not here, but on the Johnson & Johnson press release, they said about 44% of the total study population was from the U.S. And the remaining percentage of participants were from other countries, as you see here. All right, so let's talk about the safety side effects. Everyone is really concerned about this. So this is just talking about local side effects. So specifically issues, or side effects at the site of injection. So majority of people, so let's break this down. So this kind of talks about what the adverse reaction was, the time in which people, kind of the average time people started having symptoms, the average duration, and did they have symptoms over 7 days? And it goes through this for erythema and swelling. So for pain, majority of people had pain. Definitely more people had pain at the injection site in the vaccine group as opposed to placebo group. But it looks like on average, most people, the onset was around 2 days, and the mean kind of duration or the average time that they felt pain was 2 days. When we think about erythema, so erythema is redness at the injection site. Again, more people who received the actual vaccine complained of pain, but it's only complaints of redness, but it's only 7.3% of those people. Again, the duration was about 2 days, and just a very small percentage, 0.8% of people experienced redness at the injection site over 7 days. And then lastly, swelling. Again, more people had swelling at the injection site in the study group as opposed to the placebo. And again, a very small percent, most people just 2 or 3 days, these symptoms were resolved. Only a relatively small percent, 0.5% of people had swelling beyond 7 days. All right, so now let's talk about systemic side effects. So these are side effects like things outside of just that where you got the shot. So again, the breakdown is the same in terms of talking about the average time of onset or the average time that this particular symptom started, the average duration, and if you had symptoms, the number of people who had symptoms over 7 days. So when it came to, well, just this kind of, this is actually very similar to local side effects in that every single adverse reaction that's listed here, the people who actually received the real vaccine experienced it more often than the placebo group. Regarding fatigue, about 38% of the study population who received the vaccine had fatigue. About the same for headache. 33% had myalgias, which are muscle pain. 14.2% of people had nausea, and about 9% of people had fever. So this is relatively consistent with what was seen in the Pfizer and Moderna studies. All right, so let's talk a little bit about efficacy because everybody is talking a lot about this. People are very, very nervous. So let's just kind of define it and talk a little bit about this. All right, so efficacy is a measure. It measures the proportion of disease reduction in people who are vaccinated. So for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, a lot of numbers have been put out, but specifically what was submitted to the FDA, it was reported that the efficacy was 66.1% at 28 days after vaccination. So basically, this means that in people who are vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there will be 66.1% fewer cases of COVID-19. So people always think, oh, well, what about Pfizer, Moderna? They're reporting efficacy rates over 90%. But what does that mean? That means that if you were in a group of people who received Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, you will see over 90% fewer cases of COVID-19. That doesn't mean that, so that's what we have to be very careful about how we're interpreting the data. In a group of people who are vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we will see 66% fewer cases of COVID-19 compared to a group that's unvaccinated. That's still a lot lower than not having the vaccine at all. So my recommendation would be for anyone who is unvaccinated to get whatever vaccine is available. Okay? At this point, because again, this is an emergency situation. They're still both good. It's just that, the Pfizer Moderna will cause even more, like fewer cases, but it's still overall reducing the amount of cases of COVID-19. And that's what our overall goal is. All right. Just a few highlights. All right. The one cool thing about this is that this Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that you only need one shot to have full protection. The other unique thing is the actual vector, or the actual major component of this vaccine is an adenovirus, which is a DNA virus. It overall has the same side effect profile as the Pfizer Moderna. And as we stated, the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is about 66%. The one thing I forgot to mention on the slide is this vaccine is super stable. And that is really important when we're talking about accessibility of the vaccine. So, according to Johnson & Johnson press release, this vaccine could be stored for 3 months at that 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, or 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 months. And it can remain stable at -4 degrees Fahrenheit or -20 degrees Celsius for 2 years. So this makes, we don't have to have that extreme cold chain that we, need for the Pfizer. So specifically for the Pfizer vaccine, you have to keep it at -70 degrees Celsius for storage. And for the Moderna, you have to keep it at -20 degrees Celsius for storage and transport. So the one good thing is, there are rural places where you're unable to keep the vaccine refrigerated at these extreme temperatures, as well as, other places where for whatever reason they don't have as many resources. So this vaccine is definitely a game changer. All right, that's all I have for you. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Until next time.